Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm very excited to be here once again. As always, my name is Fernando Vizcaíno. I'm from Data Mining. I've been working with Alteryx mainly for the past 8 years. So a lot of work, a lot of projects, a lot of POCs, so you name it. I've been an Alteryx community top contributor for a long time, both related to Designer and Server. And of course, I'm an ACE, I'm certified, all the certifications there, I got it. And I'm a part of the enablement team as well. So very shortly here about data mining. So we are a boutique business intelligence consultancy founded in 2005, and we are an end-to-end BI solutions located and headquarters in Florida, right? And we are able to support you through all of your analytics journey, right? So it doesn't really matter if you don't know, if you have a use case, for example, we are able to guide you through it. So we have industry knowledge, we have technical knowledge, and we can go from there until everything to the part where we are able to train you as well. So as you can see here, we have many other partners, right? Others than Alteryx, but we can help you with business intelligence, data and change management, and we can help you through projects as well as training sessions related to any tool that you are seeing here, okay? And we are in our third webinar, so we have a long journey ahead. And today we are going to be talking about uploading and the production process in general when you are dealing with Alteryx Server. So far, I think you have a better understanding on the user side. So as an end user, as well as a developer, you are able to understand how to work your ways with sharing your workflows or running your workflows basically in the server. And of course, later during the next sessions, we'll talk more about the admin side of things, or the IT side of things, as well as more advanced stuff, right? So we're going to be talking about managing MongoDB, how to troubleshoot your Alteryx server, and all the way until the Gallery APIs. So learn what the Gallery APIs actually are, as well as learning how to build one from scratch. So here we have a 12 session series with all the knowledge that data mining gathered through all of this year. So it's very important, and I would say you can't miss any of this session. It's very informative, okay? But with no further ado, let's get started here. And for our agenda here, today we are going to be talking basically about the production process, right? So you have a workflow, how to get your workflow to show in your gallery, right? And from there, you'll be able to share and all of those things that you mentioned in your previous webinar. So we will be learning how to publish workflows, open workflows, and everything related to that. So version control, packaging workflows where share assets. You understand what I'm talking about, workflow locking, credentials, how to leverage the two options of data connections that we currently have in our server, as well as showing the outputs and also providing a user interface for our end users, right? So that's, maybe you know this already, so it's something that we call analytical apps, right? And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You have the Q&A there enabled. We have consultants here on the back door helping us with all the questions. And of course, for some, will be answered live if, of course, we have time, okay? But let's get to it. So Alteryx Gallery production process. So for now, you know, the Gallery is a browser-based solution and have access. Here we are showing the admin page but it's the same and identical for the user side, right? Where you can run your workflows and share your workflows. But now if you want to publish to your gallery, publish your workflows or manage everything that you have there, it's all done from Alteryx Designer. And of course, I mentioned this already, but with Alteryx Server, you'll be able to scale, share, schedule, and govern, meaning that you'll be able to run multiple workflows simultaneously or have more RAM, more performance, more cores to run a workflow, and you will be running that faster. You'll be able to share your workflows with other users and also share the development of those workflows through version control. Schedule your workflow so you don't need to click the run button over and over, and that's amazing. And also govern everything that is happening. This is for curators or admins, right? For them to be able to see everything that everyone is doing, as well as managing all the assets that they have available on the server, meaning workflows, users, collections, credentials, so many different things that you need to keep in mind that you can start using when using Alteryx Server. But let's get started then. So when publishing workflows, as I mentioned, it's from your designer. And the first step there is for you to add a server. So go to your file tab, save as or open workflow, it doesn't really matter, and select the Alteryx Server option. So when clicking on there, you will need to include actually your URL, right? So it can be an ATP or HTTPS, depending on the usage of SSL certificates. And you don't need to worry about that. We're going to be covering that in a later session related to installation and deployment. But for this gallery URL, we need to define that during the installation process. And the structure would look like this. So ATP or HTTPS, depending on the security of your server and your server name and /gallery. So the /gallery here is optional currently, so you can have only your company Alteryx server or something like that. And the same URL that you are using in your browser is exactly the same one that you gotta use here as well. And one important note here is that your version, and this is very important for you to be able to connect to your server, your designer version must be equal or a lower version than your Alteryx server. So I know that you have that notification here for you to upgrade your server or your designer, sorry, but keep in mind that by doing that, maybe you will lose your access to your gallery, right? And that's because maybe the newest version of Designer has new tools, new features, things that your server doesn't currently have. So that's the whole idea. You would try to connect and this would stay here. Okay, so that's very important for you to know. But okay, so after connecting, you will see the save workflow page, right? So from here, you have many options actually, but let's talk about the basic stuff first. So the first one there is the workflow name. So as you can see here, publishing a workflow on the gallery, that's the name of my workflow, but you gotta be careful here. So Alteryx allows you to save workflows with the same name. Okay, so if you save a different workflow to your gallery and for some reason it has the same name, the workflow will be saved there and it will look like a copy of that same workflow, but it could be a whole different thing there. So that happens because Alteryx, when handling those workflows, actually handles the workflow ID and not the workflow description. Okay, so that's very important when you are creating new versions of the workflows. you need to keep in mind that that's possible, okay? And the location here, you have two different options. So your workspace, the place of the development, your personal workspace, or a collection that someone gave you access for and to, okay? The worker tag here, and this is related to a multi-node environment. So if I have more than one node running the workflows, then that's when you have a workflow tag. So for example, you can have a worker to run more workflow data science workflows, for example. Then maybe you have a worker tag here because this server has more RAM, this server has more number of cores. And then since you know that this is more core intensive, then that's something that you can select. But of course, this is configured by your administrator, your server admin. And if you have this grayed out, that means that you don't have this enabled for your server or for your user, okay? And you have also the option here to include comments. So when you are dealing with version control, and maybe you have multiple users developing the same workflow, it's important for you to comment everything that you just did, so other users would be aware of all the changes and things like that, okay? Okay, all good to go. Then when you hit save here, you go directly to this page. So if you are lucky, or if you know what you're doing, or if you are dealing with a basic workflow for starters, you'll see that you have no issues. So you are saving the workflow, you see here all green, and you can also see this workflow in the browser. So this will link you to your gallery and your workflow there already. But of course, for some of you that are trying to save more complex workflows on the gallery, so maybe you run into some issues. So one thing to keep in mind here, that's not usual for you to see these issues, but depending on the type of workflow or how knowledgeable you are in Alteryx Designer, maybe you can face one of these issues. So unable to translate alias, yes and not found, unable to resolve plugin Python, Python R packages are missing, not found, can find the file, macro, or fail to authenticate. So a few examples here. And one thing that you can do is go to the community. You have the knowledge base there showing you step by step how to solve any of these issues, but we also have another session for this. So have one session called Do I Need to Call IT, where we also, this Alteryx Server Troubleshooting, where we'll walk you through all of these issues and others. Okay, so you as I mentioned, you can't miss all of the sessions. So if you, for some reason, have one of these issues, go to that webinar and we'll be able to guide you through the solution there, okay? But one thing worth mentioning here is that when saving the workflow, I get a lot of questions related to the execution time, right? So let's say that your workflow on Designer takes 20 or 30 minutes to run, okay? So when you save this workflow to the gallery like this will actually run instantly. So the idea for this part is that we are performing something that Alteryx call a zero check validation. It's basically looking all the accesses, everything that you have in your designer, if you have the same things in your server. So one way for you to troubleshoot these messages, you need to think of the server as an extension of your designer, meaning that everything that you configure in your designer must be configured in a similar way. I wouldn't say identical, but similar way in your server, okay? And after you got everything solved, or even if you have issues, you'll be able to see your workflow on the gallery. And João covered everything here, but only for us to review a little bit. So we are on your workspace. So if you are a developer, you have access to your personal place here. From here, you are able to run, schedule, and download your workflows. And this is depending on the permissions that the admin gave to you. So run workflow, you will be able to, but scheduling and downloading, so that's something that you gotta have permissions to do. And of course, you can make your workflows public, as well as dealing with the version. So here we are developing this 6th version of this workflow, but the 4th one is the one that all the end users are using currently. You can see here that I'm the workflow owner. I have all the job results. So everything that I run before, it's right here. So if I want to get the output, the results, the login information from my previous runs, as well as understanding the errors once again. So I don't need to save the workflow once again. I don't need to run the workflow once again to get those results. I can see all of that from here or from the workflow results, okay? But that's not the topic for today. So moving forward here, opening workflows. So right now, you know how to publish the workflows to your gallery for others to see or for you to test. But now you need to open the workflows if you want to update them, create a new version, or check what other users are doing, right? And the same idea here. So open workflow. Now you have access to your servers. And as you can see here, we have 2 different options. We have our development server, where we usually use for testing or for testing upgrades or new things, right? And then if you are positive that it's working and we can start sharing that with end users, then we move the workflow to the production environments. This can be done manually, but also it can be done automatically through something that we call workflow migration. So that's something that you'll learn in the Gallery API session, right? But keep in mind that you can do that manually as well if you don't have many workflows. All right, development. So when we click here, you have access to all the workflows that it is in your workspace or the ones that were shared with you, both through collections or the public gallery. And you can see that here. So I have the ones from my studio, I have the ones from my public gallery, and there are some from collections as well. So my private studio, public server, and the ones from collections. You need to keep in mind that you are only allowed to save your workflows in your workspace or in collections, right? So for all the public workflows that you have access to, when you will be able to open that on Designer, you'll be able to edit and to check what is really happening there. But when you publish that back to your gallery, you will be creating a new copy of that workflow. So for you to create a new version of this, that workflow, it would need to be on your workspace or in a collection that was shared with you, okay? And don't worry, when you have a public workflow and you save that workflow back to the gallery, then you'll see a message saying that it's creating a copy. So you know that you are not creating a new version, okay? And of course here, you can click in a workflow, and the difference here, as you can see the versions, the ones that are grayed out here, is that these ones are public, all public, okay? And for those that have access to the versions, that means that it is in your workspace or in your collection, and you can open. So here you can see why the comment are important. So from here, I have no idea what is actually going on with this workflows. So I was the workflow owner here developing, and then Caesar, that's also here on the backstage, answering all of your questions. He also included a few things there, and we have no idea what is going on here, right? But the idea here is that you can open the workflow and check that out. So you can see that the fourth one is the one published, but we can open the sixth one and continue with the development, right? And when you open, you would see this a workflow similar that you have in your designer already. And of course, you need to remove this page here. But the whole idea that now you have your workflow in your designer. And after you're doing all the updates that you gotta do, then you can save this back to the gallery, right? One thing to keep in mind that's very important for you to manage new versions. When saving workflows in your gallery, you have two options, right? So you have the save as option and the save option. Save as, you are creating a copy of that workflow with this name to this location, to Fernando Vizcaíno's studio. If you hit save, then you create a new version of the same workflow. So if you want to see that, right? So if you want to see this new version created, you need to hit save, not save as. Very important. Okay, and when you deal with the workflows, we have a few additional options here. So the first one is that you can make this version the published one. So if this is the workflow that you are basically testing and developing, but you don't want to share with the end users, then you need to uncheck this box. And you have also the option here to validate your workflows, meaning that when you are saving the workflow, Alteryx Server would check all the accesses, all the connections, the outputs, and everything that it needs to be checked. And the reason here that actually makes a lot of sense for you to always check this box, but sometimes, and that's something that's also possible on the gallery, that you are able to save macros, to publish macros for you to share with others in your server, right? So the whole idea is that if you are saving a macro usually is dependent of an input or things like that. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for you to validate that workflow. So that's when you uncheck this box. But okay, but the topic of these slides for us to learn how to manage our assets, right? So, and we have two options. We have the option to package or workflows, similar functionalities as you have in your designer, and you want to share that workflow with other users. You can see that in your options tab. And you have the option here to share assets, okay? And with this, we have two different options. So when we are saving the workflow or publishing the workflow on your gallery, you have assets associated with that workflow. So it could be inputs, files, data sources, outputs, as well as macros, or anything else that you are using in your workflow, right? And the first option, if you leave this checked, you are packaging your workflow. So it's similar to a zip file where you are including all of your workflows and all of your inputs and outputs and sending that direct to the server. So what would happen there is that your workflow or Alteryx is creating a copy of everything on the gallery. So let's say that you have a static file that you don't need to update that. You never need to update that. So if you check the box, you are sending that copy to your gallery together with your workflow, and the user, when running the workflow, would access that file, right? And for the outputs, it's a little bit different actually. So if you want the users, the end users, to see the outputs on the gallery, and later I will show how that actually is, you need to check the box. So when you have this checked, I'm sending this file together with the workflow, and also I'm enabling the end users to see these reports and also download the reports directly from the gallery. But the other option there is if you uncheck the box, so very important as well for those of you using Alteryx Server for the first time, when you uncheck the box, the files are being read from the source. So have a live file in your folder, and Alteryx is loading that file during the runtime. And the same goes for the output. So if you're running a workflow, the outputs are being saved to its destination. And for that to work, you must use a share folder. In the share folder that Alteryx Server has access to. So that's very important. Okay, so you gotta have access from your designer, but your server is also to have access to that same share folder. And for that to work, you must use UNC path. And what is that? UNC path is the network name of a folder. So maybe you map that to your Z drive or your E drive, but when you are using server, you need to use the UNC path. And you can do that automatically. Okay, so don't worry. You can go to options, advanced options of your designer, and you have workflow dependencies there. So take a look there and check how to do that automatically. Okay. All right, next option, enable workflow locking. So the idea here for this part is that users now, if you lock your workflow, cannot open or edit these workflows. So you have this function on designer also, but you have the same option on the server. And it's very important, once you lock a workflow, you can't unlock it. So it's very important for you to save a copy of that workflow before doing this, okay? And also with this option, the end users on the gallery that you share publicly or privately, doesn't matter, they can run the workflows, right? And you can also specify users here to run the workflows. So the idea, right? So serial number is not a serial number, it's an email. So the email register in the gallery. So if you include, for example, an email here, only that user will be able to run the workflow, right? The idea here is let's say you have a highly confidential workflow that you need to share only with one user. You have the option to share that to a collection, you create a collection, and then you add that one user to the collection, and that's totally fine. But admins have access to that collection, and they could include additional users there, right? So the idea here is that by specifying this, it doesn't really matter if admins are including other users there, or if someone has access to the workflow and download that to use in another company or things like that. So this would make that impossible to happen. Of course, this would be locking, would be creating a new version, a locked version of the file. But if you want to access previous versions, previous and unlocked versions, you would be able to do that from Designer, okay? Set workflow credentials. So the idea for this option is that, let's say that you are using a shared folder or you are connecting to a data source using Windows authentication, anyone other users should also have access to that. So one thing that we all need to understand is that by default, workflows running on the server are using the service account, right? The Alteryx Server service account to run the workflow. So it doesn't matter if you are the one publishing the workflow on the gallery, right? After publishing, it's not you anymore running that workflow. It's the user responsible for the Alteryx serves process. But of course, here, when saving the workflows, you have the option to include one user to run. So have two different options here. You have the option, this is highly used for you to run the workflow with these credentials. This could be your credential or any other credential that has been shared with you by the admin. And the idea here is that the workflow can impersonate a different user. Sometimes for compliance purposes, you are not able to do that in your company, and this is disabled, right? So the whole idea here is that it's used to control the access to private data or to folders or data sources the service account doesn't have access to. And also, similar to the locking functionality, you could also demand that the end user running the workflow, that they must specify their own credentials before running. So it would act similar to workflow locking, but if the users have access to the share folder, then they would also have access to your workflow and to the results there. And this can be disabled or enabled by your server administrator. So if you are not seeing this option when publishing this workflow, that means that your server has not that functionality enabled, and you could ask him if that's possible. Okay. All right. So now you understand all the intricacies here, the options, all the workflow options that you have. But now let's talk about gallery data connections. So we were talking about shared folders and files, but maybe you are connecting to data sources. So let's say here, a Microsoft SQL Server, right? And with this, you have two different options, but the idea for the gallery data connections, that's a centralized area for gallery administrators to create and share database connections, okay? So the idea here is that it avoids the need for IT to create database connections on your machine, for example, your personal laptop. So every time, maybe it highly dependent on the security of your company, but sometimes since you don't have admin permissions in your computer, you are not able to install anything there. And even Designer, maybe you needed to ask someone from IT to install Designer in your machine. And the idea here is that for connections, sometimes, not always, you need to configure the ODBC connection there. And for that, you also need to be an admin, right? And with this gallery data connections, there are ways for you to manage that lack of permission, and you don't need to create that anymore. And it's very easy for admins to manage everything. So you have a centralized area on the admin page. We're going to be talking about that in the next session, to manage all the connections that everyone has access to. And if you want to enable or disable or remove a user from a connection, it's very easy for you to manage and see. And users no longer need to know the connection information to connect to their data, as well as the password. So you don't need to have that anymore. And that simplifies the security for password sharing throughout the company, right? And with that, of course, that's mandatory, and that's one thing that IT gotta do before you're using the connection. You must have the same ODBC driver version as your server. So as I mentioned, your server is an extension of your designer and the other way around. So everything that you have in your server, for that to work in your designer as well, you gotta have the same functions there. And for connections, you need to have the ODBC driver version, and that's here. So for example, for this connection, ODBC driver 17 for SQL Server, right? So we have the Alteryx licensing portal, and there you can download all of these things, or you can download from Microsoft directly. Okay, next option, data connection manager. So this brand new, if I'm not mistaken, this is from 21.4. And I forgot to mention, but this webinar is talking about the 22.1 version, right? So if you're looking for a workspace and you don't know what is actually going on because your server is a little bit different is because in 21.4, to simplify, we remove studios and we replace that by my workspaces, okay? And with that came the data connection manager. And it's basically the same idea. It's a centralized management for data sources and credentials. The difference that this is per user. With this, you'll be able to share the connections with end users to run your workflows on the gallery. So before, with gallery data connections, admin responsibility. Right now, this is your responsibility. Multiple sources and tools supported. So you'll be able to connect to data sources, connect to URLs, connect to cloud-based connectors. So you name it, a lot of options coming with the data connection manager, as well as authentication methods supported. So it could be user and password, could be tokens, it could be related to OAuth authentication. So many different options here for data sources as well as authentication. And as you can see here, now we have two different pages. We have the data sources one and the credentials one. So here we are managing all the data sources, of course, and here all the credentials. So the difference here right now is that now I have one credential that can be used for multiple data sources. So as we know that sometimes is an issue, we need to update our passwords on a monthly basis or every 3 months, right? So that's very common. And every time you update your passwords, you need to update all of your workflows and all of your connections. The idea here is that right now, you only need to update the password here and everything would be working, right? So data sources, credentials, and then when we connect a data source to a credential, that's when we have a connection. So it's called data connection manager, but we could call data sources and credential manager, okay? All right. And what is the difference between them, right? So we know, and we are seeing many questions on the community already. For those of you working with a previous gallery version, what is the difference, right? So why do we have two? So the main difference, of course, data connection manager is brand new. We are not sure if the gallery data connections will be removed. I don't think so. It will be there, but will not be updated anymore. And Alteryx will focus more on DCM. But that's my guess, right? But let's get started here. So the difference here, the main difference is that DCM is decentralized and gallery data connection are centralized, meaning that admins are managing everything. And the DCM are managed by artisans. So artisans, developers, curators, admins. So for the DCM, you have one DCM per artisan, and gallery data connection, you have one for the whole gallery. And another important part here is that for the DCM, admins have no idea what is happening there. They don't have access to your connections or your credentials. So it's very secure. It's very secure, but the problem there is that they can lose track of everything that the artisans are accessing. So that's one issue. But here, and of course, for DCM, the gallery admin and the server admin need to enable that option for the users to be able to use that. So have a central permission, but if you have that enabled, you'll be able to use it. Types of connections: DCM, ODBC, OLEDB, URLs, connectors, and more to come. So you are able to use the download tool and a URL saved in your DCM, and all the connectors, SharePoint, output. So everything that you have there and you need to manually connect, now you can use DCM to manage. And with the gallery data connections, it's mainly for our data sources with ODBC and OLEDB connection. Related to the manager, and this I mentioned before, DCM, data sources and credentials manager, and gallery data connection manager, meaning that if you have a password change, for example, then you will need to replace all the passwords in all the connections, okay? And this is very important. So a question that we always receive, so why don't we keep data connection manager instead of gallery data connections, right? So the idea there is that with the DCM, it's only integrated with owner's designer. And that's the only user that can use the connections on designer. And when we think about the gallery data connection, if you share that with a group of developers, they all will be able to run workflows on designer as well as in the gallery. Okay, so that's very important. So that's the one and only issue that's maybe it's a problem for the users or for the admins using the gallery data connection. Showing outputs in the gallery. So for this, you have many options, but let's cover 3 of the options here. So the first one, and once again, if you check the box, that means that you are showing the assets, the output for the end user, then you need to configure like this. And when you configure like this, then you have something that looks like this. One thing to keep in mind here is that you have a sample of your output, and the user is also able to download its output. So when you are using the YXDB file, that means that the user has also access to a sample, but not the file entirely and visually here. But they will be able to download the full file here and select different file formats, okay? Another option for you to use the render tool. So if you use this combination of a base table plus a render tool, then you will see something like this, okay? So when you create that, when you use that, that means that you are showing the whole table to the end user. And the user has also the same options here to download from numerous file formats. So the idea, if you want to show the whole table to the user, or if you want to show a report, a pre-report for the user to analyze something, so you need to use that combination. Reporting tools at the end of it, a render tool with the PC XML format configure. Okay, so now you understand how to work with your assets, but let's say now that you want to provide a user interface for the end users. So one amazing thing from Alteryx, and that's fantastic actually, is that you can give access to end users with no additional costs. And right now you are also able to create a great user interface for those users. So let's say that you have this workflow published on the gallery. A simple workflow here, as you can see, a basic data set, and it's basically filtering, sampling the first row, and some nonsense here, multiplying the total sales per 10, and that's basically it. So the idea right now is that maybe I have a group of users and each user is responsible for a different city, or let's say each user has a different file, master file here that they want to analyze, right? So the idea here is that now we can use this that we call interface tools, right? So I have one here for file browse, another one for drop down, so you name it. So you have a lot of options here, and you have the action tool here that is guiding the interface tool to do anything that you want in your tool here in Alteryx, right? So the idea for the action tool, so if you can do that manually here, select the configuration manually on your tool here in Designer, you can have the actual tool doing that automatically for you on the server, right? So here, an example, we have 19 different action types. So have one drop down, list, text box, map. So we have a lot of options there. And for each of those, you have the option here. So this is the action tool. You have the option to update value. So let's say here, in this case, I have the operands. I'm changing the Colorado Springs to a different filter select by the user. So that's how it's configured. So we are able to update the value. We are able to update the XML, and would say that the backend of your file, right? And anything at all. So you do anything that you can or anything that you want in your workflow. For the front end, for the user select, you have the option here to manually set values, as well as automatically get that information from an external source or anything at all here. So it includes all the cities manually here. And of course, we can also handle the interface, the user interface. So Interface Designer, identical to working with your analytical apps in Designer, right? And from here, we can change the order, we can include the name, so you name it. So you can see here the analytical app, and we can also test it, right? So we have here ways for testing your workflow. So let's say I have the workflow and I want to include a whole different files, and select a new city and everything. And I need to be able to know if I configure everything properly. And I can open debug here, meaning that I'm sending all of this information to my workflow. And what I would get as a result is something like this, right? So as you can see, we don't have action tools, we don't have interface tools anymore. And the idea now is that everything has been replaced to its right configuration. And when we go back now, of course, this was a side training session here related to analytical apps, very fast. But when we move back to the server, to the gallery, that's what we see. Right, so I have the same idea here. So now the end user will be able to select anything as they want. And once again, they don't need to have additional knowledge related to Alteryx in general. They don't need to know how to access this link directly, and they would be able to do anything at all. Right? So anything is possible right now. Okay, so that's basically it for today. To summarize, we talk about everything related to the production process, so publishing, opening workflows. We understood all the options related to the workflows, how to include credentials, how to work with data connections, as well as how to add a user interface to everything that we are doing. So right now, I think you are ready to publish your first workflow and to share that with other end users so you can play with it. But as I mentioned before, we have many more sessions. We have 9 to go, a lot of them related to the admin parts. But if you want to understand more of the pain points of the other users, so if you're an end user, you want to understand an admin's life for the Alteryx server, you can navigate through all of these sessions and learn more about Alteryx. Once again, all of our knowledge, my 8 years of knowledge are all here for us to share with you. But of course, if you don't want to deal with anything at all, we can support you through the whole journey, right? So from the assessment and planning your installation for you to understand if Alteryx server is right for you, until the server installation, if you need to migrate your server as well as upgrade your server to a newest version, we can support you. If you are having performance issues or workflow issues, or you want someone to help you understand what is actually going wrong in your server, we can support you. And similar to these webinar sessions, if you want to be trained on Designer, Server, Connect, or any other tool, or if you have projects that want us to handle, we can support you as well as managing your server as a whole. So adding collections, configuring, giving access to the users, we have something that we call managed services, and we can support you during the installation journey, as well the implementation and all the guidance that the users need to do everything as they should, right? So we have 4 more minutes here. Let me check if you have questions. So I have one here. So could I create different accounts such as Alteryx Service, Alteryx Executes, and use the gallery without any person-based login? Yes, you could do that. Of course, for that, you will need to ask IT to create those users, and those users must have access to the share folders and things like that. But yes, that's actually a good question and a good idea for you to not need to include your user when running the workflows. So another one here, in DCM connection, so the data connection manager, do I still need to contact IT to install the required drivers in my machine and the server? Yes, the answer is yes. So to install in your personal machine, if you have admin permission, you don't need IT to do that. But similar to Alteryx Designer, if you need IT to install Alteryx Designer in your machine, you will need to contact them to install the proper drivers as well. And in the server, as I mentioned before here, the idea is that we can support you through that process. So when we are installing the server, we are also questioning and guiding your IT employee to install all the drivers and everything that needs to be installed there, right? Let me see another question. So for DCM, if you have a default run as user, should artisans be sharing with that default run as user? Yes, so it's a little bit different when we talk about credentials and DCM. So I'm not sure if I understood the question, but I will answer what I understood actually. So when we use DCM to publish a workflow to the gallery, it doesn't matter the workflow credential that you are including there. So it only matters the one that's being used by DCM. For that to work, you gotta have the DCM enabled for your company. If not, you will need to use the gallery data connections and the run as user for you to be able to use that user to connect. Right? So with DCM, you won't be able to use the workflow credentials as you would use that for share folders and things like that. So one last question. Could Alteryx Server create a version of output too, such as output 20 something? Okay, so the idea, yes, actually, yes. So when you configure your output data tool, you can also include that as a dynamic name. So similar to your designer, you will be able to do that in your server. And the same goes for jobs. So if you have a job scheduled and you want to rename that to another one, so let's say you want to rename that to the specific month that was run, you can also do that. So the only issue there when you are dealing with a job renaming is that you need to do that manually, right? But that's it for today, guys. I hope that you like our session as much as I liked. If you want to know more about server, or if you want to have a trial period of the server, feel free to contact us. Alteryx provides everyone with a trial version, a 30-day trial version, and we can help you during the installation and testing process. So feel free to reach us out and we can guide you through that testing. Other than that, please follow us, our social media. So we are on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter, posting on a daily basis. So videos, posts. So feel free to subscribe or to connect with us. And thanks a lot for attending. See you next time.